Thank you so much for attending our third annual business day at City Hall. I'm Anna Stinson with the Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. We are excited for this continued partnership with the City of Bloomington and are hopeful that you will find much value in the presentations today. The theme of today's program is Building a Future-Ready Community. The City of Bloomington has always been proud of the role that our city's businesses play in the financial stability of our community. Today, we are here to look beyond the horizon at what we can see and imagine our communities one generation from now. We will begin with a panel discussing trends in 4 categories: resources, technology, demographics, and governance that could impact how our businesses and local government operate in the next generation. We'll continue the discussion with a fun and engaging breakout session about how these future trends will affect Bloomington, led by city staff, and then we'll conclude with a preview of upcoming large-scale events happening in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. But before we get started, I would like to thank the sponsors of today's event. Would the representatives from the following companies please stand and be recognized? Mall of America, Centerpoint Energy, Excel Energy, Envision Catering and Hospitality, Drazen Henke and Associates, Health Partners, and Rasmussen College. Without sponsors like you, we would not be able to hold our programs and events. Thank you. To introduce our panel speakers, I would like to bring up the City Manager of Bloomington, Jamie Verbrugge.
Good morning. Welcome. Thanks for being here. First, let me recognize our city council members here who are here today. Mayor Winstead, even though he's part of the program, it's good to see him here. Councilmember Tim Bussey, Councilmember John Olson, Councilmember Jack Beloga, and I think I got everybody, right? Nobody snuck in without me seeing. Good. School board member Dick Bergstrom's here. Thanks, Dick. Former state representative Ann Lincheski's back there. So, you know, she used to be an elected official, so she used to be somebody. Well, this is an exciting topic, and so I just really want to provide a quick background on how we got to this conversation, and then we'll jump into our panel. There's a group called the Alliance for Innovation that the City of Bloomington is a member of. It's a national organization, and it brings together some of the most progressive government organizations in the country, and together with academia, looks ahead to what not the best practices are, but what the emerging practices are. They're really focused on where is the future of local government going. And so for the City of Bloomington, it's been a good organization to be part of because of the access to information and resources. Our Chief Financial Officer, Lori Economy Scholler, is our organizational ambassador to the Alliance. She's going off, as a matter of fact, to their Big Ideas seminar coming up here in a couple weeks, where they sit around and they do big thinking, right? It's pretty cool. So about 3 years ago, they said, you know, we really need to look at the future and what is defining the future. And so they came up with the next big things. And I know that you received the link to that report, and some of you grabbed the hard copies that were out there that we'll use when we do our breakouts. But the report here identifies the 4 forces and the 4 forces and 44 trends that are going to be significant in the next 20 years affecting communities and local government. And then the whole point of this is to get communities thinking and acting on what these forces are and understanding how it impacts their community. So we had some members of our staff sit down, and they took these playing cards here that are each of the trend areas. And they went through an exercise to figure out what are the ones that are going to be the most likely to affect us here in Bloomington, and the impact will be the greatest. And so what you'll see is we have this little map here that takes all of these 44 trends and puts them on a high impact, high likelihood scale. So the ones that are up here in the right-hand corner are the ones that our staff thought are probably the most likely to impact our community. We asked our panelists to take a look at the report and the trends area, and we have them loosely affiliated with each one of the forces. So I'll introduce the panel at this point, and then I'm going to jump up there and help facilitate the conversation. Chris Locher, Vice President of Software Development at the Nerdery here in Bloomington, leads more than 350 user experience designers and software engineers and project managers. And he has a group working for him not just here in Minneapolis, but at their offices in Chicago and Kansas City and Phoenix. Is that right? So Chris tells me that he was employee number 99 with the Nerdery 8 years ago. They're a 12-year-old company, and now they're over 500 people in 4 locations. So very successful company. Chris will be talking about the technology trend area. Mayor Elizabeth Kautz from the city of Burnsville has been the mayor of that fine city since her election in 1994. And Mayor Kautz has made sure that Burnsville is always a city that punches above its weight. She was president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors a couple of years ago, and when she assumed that role, her city, Burnsville, is the smallest city. It's not a small city around here, right? We got 65,000, 60,000 people.
62.
There you go. But in terms of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which is the biggest cities in the country tend to lead that organization, Mayor Kautz was the first small city mayor to lead that group because she brings a very powerful vision and a very strong commitment to local government and voices that within the U.S. Conference of Mayors. She continues to be involved there as the chair of their Finance and Audit Committee. She's chairperson for the St. Mary's University Council of Regents. She's on the board of directors for Greater MSP. She's involved in the Governor's Workforce Development Board. She's co-founder of the Regional Council of Mayors. She is absolutely committed to regionalism and good governance. And as a spokesperson for the governance trends, I think that you will find her input interesting. John Johannson is from Colliers International. He's senior vice president over there. John represents institutional owners with leased and managed portfolio of approximately 3 million square feet. He's active in the investment sales sector. He's been involved in the sale of approximately 12 shopping centers exceeding 1.2 million square feet in the past 7 years. He's a principal owner, developer, and manager of a retail portfolio of about 1.2 million square feet. So John is slotted with the demographic trends because he really needs to understand those demographic forces and how it affects his business. And so from the business perspective, I think that John's insight will be helpful. And then finally, Tim Sandry is the chair of our Bloomington Sustainability Commission. Tim is speaking to the resources trends. He is chairing a startup organization here at the City of Bloomington, as our City Council recently established the Sustainability Commission just last year. They empaneled them early this year, and with Tim's leadership, they have a very aggressive work plan to move forward on the Council's commitment to sustainability. He comes to our commission after a very successful private sector career in IT and change management. And so in addition to those two areas, which he is an expert, he's passionate about issues related to sustainability and the environment. So we got a great panel, and I'm excited to have all 4 of them. I'm going to jump up there. We're going to give them each about 10-15 minutes to offer their own individual perspective on the different trends that they see affecting them and the work that they do, and get you thinking about this. And then I'll jump in and ask some questions, and we'll leave a little time at the end so that you can ask some questions. When we're done, the breakout, as Anna said, is designed to be both thought-provoking and fun. Okay? And, at government, that's kind of crazy. So we're glad that you're here to help us loosen up a little bit. So we're going to have you select tables out there. We've got 2 for each of these each of these trend areas. So some of you identified the trend area that you're interested in. If you haven't done that already, just pick one of the tables. And we're going to have you work in small groups to identify a trend that you think is most likely to impact us, and then tell a story of why that's going to happen. And how you tell the story is where the fun comes in. So we'll look forward to that in the report out. And then when we conclude today, Mayor Winstead will talk about some of the next big things that are coming up for the city of Bloomington. So I'm going to retreat, and we'll get started. I'm going to ask Mayor Kautz to begin today. So, Mayor, I think the conversation that we've had recently, and even this morning, there's a lot of change occurring, right? And it's a dynamic environment right now. What do you see as the issues that are going to most affect local government here in the next 3 to 5 years?
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, everyone, for being here, because it's an important time for all of us to talk about these different pressures and challenges that impact local government. And I'm privileged that you invited me to be a part of this conversation, simply because we on the local level are at the bottom end of the food chain. And every time we turn around, somebody is either taking our cheese and placing it somewhere else, and then we're left with nothing. So what are the pressures that we are facing? Let me just outline for you what's going on in Washington right now and how that has an impact on us locally. But the first thing I want to let everyone know is this. As elected officials on the local level, we must have a long lens looking out, because these pressures are always going to be there for us. But we need to make sure that we design a community that is caring and compassionate and welcoming. A community where our people and our businesses will thrive and prosper. Our community where our families will continue to be engaged in local government and in what we do. So as we have a long view looking to the future, we can weather a lot of things. Ladies and gentlemen, there are storms, there are hurricanes, and we at the local level have to be nimble to address all of that. So as I said earlier, that there are things happening in Washington. If we don't all work together, they will move our cheese. So right now, the big thing in Washington is that they're taking our sales and local tax where we could. This has to do with their tax reform. We have our sales and local taxes. We can deduct that in our income tax returns to the federal government. Well, there's about $3 trillion worth of that. So when they take away that kind of deductions from our people, it impacts us. Where do we get our revenue? Our revenue in the local government, we live and breathe and survive to deliver services from the local tax base. That's where the majority of our money comes from. We do have fees for services and so forth. But with the decline in the federal government's effectiveness, we're at the bottom end of the food chain, so we're easy to pick from. Because if we don't pay attention, it happens. So today, I'm going to be speaking on behalf of all of us here on the local level, so that Congress understands that we know what's going on. You see, we, on the local level, mayors and council members and members of our staff, we are closest to the people. We're closest to each and every one of you. Why? Because you know us personally. You see us in the grocery stores, in churches, at the coffee shop. Wherever we go, we hear from you. You trust us because we are transparent. Everything we do, and I'm sure that this is the same here in Bloomington, whether it's our work sessions or our council meetings, it is on TV. Everything we do and what we say, you know about. The other thing that we have to do, because of everybody taking things from us, taking our financial resources, is that we on the local level have to work together, collaborate, and make sure that we get things done for our residents and for our businesses. That's why, for me, regionalism is very important. It leverages our resources. It allows us to get things done because we're working together. If we don't do that, and we are only working in isolation, we will not be effective for our people and for our businesses. We need to work together. That's why the Regional Council of Mayors came together, is to look at issues that impact local government, like housing. How do we have housing so that we can have talent, resources for the companies who are housed here? Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you talk about the federal government, the state government talks about economic development. And I look out and I'll say to you, where are your businesses located? Where are your businesses located? They're located in cities. Where do you live? You live in cities. When things happen, who do you turn to? It is cities, our staff. Who takes care and makes sure that the cities are safe so people want to locate here and live here? It's cities. We're the ones who carry the burden of all of those services. And we're the ones who have to make sure that we're collaborating together. And it's important for elected officials to not become isolated and parochial. It is important for all of us to work together so that we can address these issues that impact us.
Say, Mayor, can I interrupt you for a second? You made a comment about the local level being trusted because of our transparency. One of the forces in here is trust in government.
Absolutely.
And the fact that, especially at the federal level, trust is at an all-time low, right?
I think it's like 16%.
So how do you propose that we build trust in an era where there's a lot less likelihood to be willing to grant that trust by the people that we serve?
You know, one of the things that we continue to work on in Burnsville is that we continue to communicate and manage people's expectations and humanize our experience. Rather than writing a letter, I also follow up with a phone call. And I know our staff does that as well, and I know that happens here in business because I know that when Mayor Winstead and I go out and talk to our businesses, we were engaged in a project with the University of Minnesota where we were talking to businesses and making sure that businesses continue to thrive in our area. It's that human experience that you can't minimize, because that's where you build trust. Trust is about relationships. Trust is about knowing one another. And that's what we do best here at the local level, because we humanize the experience. It's that civic engagement that is so important. And it is, I think, one of the primary responsibilities of local officials and our appointed officials to be engaged with our citizens and our businesses. Humanize that experience so that the trust is built. Because trust isn't built on a piece of paper. Trust is built by you getting to know who the people are, who you elect to make decisions, or who are appointed to deliver the services.
So one of the forces in here is citizen engagement, which you just referenced. And I think when you were elected back in 1994, this thing called email was just starting, right? And so a lot of residents communicated by a letter that they would send in, and the expectation was that, you know, sometime 7 to 10 days later, they might get a letter back or a phone call, right? Things have changed with technology as a driver. From your perspective, what are the opportunities that you see in the use of social media and advanced communication technology and encouraging both citizen engagement and also direct democracy and the expectation for that?
Absolutely. Okay, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, and I also push out a lot of information. Why? Because people are hungry today. This is one of the trends. It's about information. So people talk about feeding the beast. I like to control my information. I want to make sure that I'm controlling the voice that's coming out of City Hall? What are we doing? Not someone else interpreting that message for us. Because, let me tell you, it does get interpreted, and there is always something that is missing translation. So, Jamie, you asked the question about emails. One of the things that I have and we have in terms of a policy within City Hall is that we get back to everyone within 24 hours or sooner. So I do that. Even if I don't know if there's a complaint, I respond to the email and say, and then I copy the staff people who are in that domain. And I say, they're going to get back to you. They're going to copy me so that I know what's going on as well. So it is about managing information, but it also is about respect. It's about respect that that person in this day and age is wanting information, and they want it now. But you also need to understand when you read an email and there's a lot of anger in that email, let it pause for a while. As someone who was in the field of psychology in one time of my life, let the emotions settle before you respond. And then you respond, but respond in a positive way, and don't address all of the anger that's coming. That's only a symptom of the frustration. And so I just let it sit for a while, a few hours, and let that person calm down before I respond. But it is about making sure that we respond to people, making sure that we know that we respect that they're angry about something, but we will address the nature of the concern, not the emotion. Don't get involved with engaging the emotion, because that's not a winning formula.
So this is a good point to transition. So thank you. We're going to hold some of those thoughts and come back to them. Okay. So talking about technology, I think Chris is a natural to step in here. And you look at these trends, you see what's coming in the future. It's critical to your business planning and the success of the business that you have. But I also know you looked at these trends, and so what was identified in here, you have some opinions on. So I'm going to pass it on to you and have you talk about what you see coming in your realm.
Sure. So I think that to start with is that technology is one of the things that is fundamental to human nature. So you've seen this, and technology has been the tool for humanity ever since we picked up a stick and made it into a spear, and then the plow, and then the printing press, right? And understanding the fundamental drivers of what technology does for humanity kind of gives you a perspective of what's happening today. Technology is there to make our lives easier and give us more time and more convenience and reduce uncertainty. That's all it is. When I first made fire as a human, it was there to make sure that I got rid of the uncertainty of making it through the night. And today, Amazon, it is to get rid of the uncertainty that pair of socks that I couldn't find at Target showed up tomorrow and give me some more time. So understanding it's that fundamental part of humanity, right? And in the past 10 years, we've seen a monumental shift. 10 years ago, actually 8.5 now, the first iPhone came out. That was just 8 years ago. So imagine 20 years from now. I mean, they just released the iPhone X, and believe it or not, all the competitors for Apple had already beat them to all those features. Look, we have a screen. That's the entire thing. Yep, Samsung did that 2 years ago. Right? So technology is evolving and expanding very rapidly. And what's happening is we have digital citizens. Some of us are digital immigrants who grew up, didn't have emails, had my first computer issued to me by the United States Navy when I was 19. Some of us have children who didn't know anything other than how to work an iPhone, and they were born into this. We're all digital citizens, and so it's not going away. So that's another fundamental thing. You can't avoid it. Change is happening. It's coming whether you want it to or not. So that's a really important thing to understand as well. But what's happening, especially with mobile and the way wireless is going on, and what you see in technology, is we're moving into what's called a shared economy. Now, the fundamental core of that is trust is moving from institutions into individuals. And the technology that you're seeing is more of a facilitation platform than that sort of ivory tower. Think of it this way. Here's a couple examples. You have Uber. Right now, Uber gives 1 million rides per day. Before Uber, it was Yellow Cab, right? Very sort of called, don't know who I'm getting. Now with Uber, I can see that Tony, who has a 4.5-star rating, is coming to pick me up in his Nissan Pathfinder, and here's what his license plate is, and here's what his picture, and by the way, here's some of the topics. Like, it becomes a human experience, right? So that's another core factor, is that humanization, which the mayor touched on. Yelp, Glassdoor. If someone would have told me that I would be using people's anonymous feedback on employers and even the government 10 years ago, I'd have been like, what? But today, Glassdoor is actually a huge driver, right? Tinder, another okay-ish example. Now, Tinder is one of those things that gets a really weird kind of rep. It's sort of like, oh my God, it's this terrible swipe left, swipe right dating thing. But 40% of people who go on Tinder are looking for long-term relationships. The number of people who are connecting on that with the intent of having a meaningful relationship is almost half. Now, that's not what the rep is, but what it also does is speaks to the facilitation. It speaks to that humanization. People are trusting strangers instead of trusting institutions. And you can see where that's happening. Equifax. Here's this huge ivory tower, this massive institution that we've been trusting all of our most critical private data to. And they had a security breach that they knew about 2 months before they fixed it. I mean, if you guys didn't know, that just came out. They knew that there was a vulnerability for months, and they got in there. And so that is another thing, is what you're seeing with technology is you're breaking down the centralized institutions into decentralized, democratized, and facilitated economy, the shared economy. Right? Even blockchain, which a lot of people look at and go, blockchain, what's that? And if you disconnect it from the cryptocurrency Bitcoin, blockchain quite literally is going to change everything in terms of technology, because here's an example of what that does. The music industry today, if you sell a hit, what happens is that and this is 1 million records, you get 32 cents for every 1 million records. Blockchain is something that will allow you to go direct to consumer and get 100% of your profits by how that works. It's the underlying technology that comes into it. It's sort of like the cloud. It's like the internet. It's right now, it's a bit of that's the trend that's coming. It'll do things like escrow. How many people here have bought a house and been sort of flustered by the amazing amount of contractual things that you have to read and understand? It didn't really read and understand as you were signing hundreds of thousands of dollars away on a home that you actually, if you think about it, spent less than an hour in before you bought it. Yeah. I mean, how many people here, when you looked at your house and bought it, spent several hours poking around it? And how many people did a couple quick walkthroughs and spent $100,000 on it? But when you look at that transaction for the contract, blockchain is going to pull a lot of that stuff out. It's going to get rid of the intermediaries. And that shared economy is really fundamentally going to change the business landscape in communities, right? In the year 2017, 15 million people will cut the cord. 15 million people will cancel their cable and dish subscriptions this year. Next year, 20 million. Now, if you're Comcast, what you're thinking is, oh my God, 10% of the entire population that consumes my service is quitting next year. Because there's a roughly 200 million cable and dish subscribers in the country. So on the outside, you're like, those are big numbers. But if you're Comcast and the other providers, you're like, oh my God, literally 10% of my customers are going away. And they're going to subscription services, where there's a company like Netflix that is facilitating their on-demand consumption of media. Now, that's not to say, oh my God, this shared economy is bad for everywhere. Just look at Shakopee and the Amazon Fulfillment Center down there. So when you think about this, it isn't just doom things. But what you have to understand is that as we go through this, you're going to see different iterations. And the key, especially with government and businesses, is to play to win and not to play not to lose. And what I mean by that is you have to draw businesses in. You have to draw people in. What you can't do is say, hey, Uber, you know what? You're threatening the cab industry here in Minneapolis. I'm going to slap some taxes on you in the airport of Minneapolis so that here's this thing. Well, guess what? People like Uber because they know it's Tim picking them up and the car is clean. And if it's a one-star driver, they can cancel it. They will squirt out of that and go find that service because they like it better anyway. So the key is to play to win in government and business, not to play, not to lose. Regulating technology and innovation just means that those companies will move across the border to South Dakota where there is no income tax, and those private businesses can do that, and they're facilitating, and they're moving, they're freeing. So that's another important aspect is the mobility. I don't have to live in Minnesota to do the job that I do at the Nerdery. I have 40 work-from-home engineers across the entire country. So roughly 10% of my staff lives in different states. And guess what? That's only going to increase because as technology facilitates people being able to expand into those areas and work remotely, they're going to find places where they can have good schools, where they have good housing opportunities, where they have local government and state government that facilitates prosperity, and they're going to work there because the large technical companies and other companies can still hire and use that talent, right? And so that shared economy and that mobility is really, really important to understand because one of the fallacies is with the institutions and government is that you can control it, that you can regulate it, that you can slap a tax on it and it'll change behaviors. Yeah, it'll change behaviors. Those companies will move, they'll flow. The people will move, they'll flow. You have to be a gravity center. You can't be a controlling institution. And as technologies come up, that's what's going to continue to drive that. It's going to become more mobile. Look at microgrids. Look at all of those different things. Right now, most electrical companies don't have to worry about you saying, hey, I don't want to take your services. But 20 years from now, when you have microgrids and solar technology and different things like that, people may be dropping off that. So it's just understanding that as that technology goes, people are going to be going for independence, et cetera. And the other interesting thing is data. Equifax is a great example. But this shared economy and blockchain and everything else, one of the things that you're going to see is people are going to start hoarding, collecting, and monetizing their own data. It isn't going to be the way it is today where people can create a digital clone of you. Right now, there's a digital clone of every single person in this room. Everything that you've Googled, everything that you've transmitted via Apple, your smartphone, every credit card transaction you've done has been collected into a digital clone of you that is being used to market. It's why your Facebook ads pop up the way that they do, all right? Some of us get way different ads than the other ones because our digital clones are looking at different things. That technology, our personal information, which is one of the few rights that we really have, is going to start to lock down. All right, so that's the kind of stuff that you're going to see also the shared economy, is that sort of technology is going to become more personal and more private. But on the flip side, it's also super interesting because technology, when Humanize has the expediency. 20 years ago, everybody in this room, and the common sentiment was, I don't want the government to wiretap me. I wonder if somebody's listening. And today, we go out and buy Alexa, and we stick it in our living room, and we just go ahead and talk to it. Samsung smart TVs, right? Those listen to your ambient conversations, record them, and sort them for filtering, talking about your digital clone. And there's funny consequences because people will point this out. I know I'm not sure too many of you are South Park fans, but their premiere 2 nights ago, they actually trolled the entire country. They were saying, Alexa, set the alarm for 7 a.m. And so thousands and thousands of people had Alexa and their smart homes set alarms for 7 a.m. And they also did some other untoward things that I'm not going to mention in this forum. But that's an interesting thing in terms of technology and how it's flowing, how it's moving. And it's becoming omnipresent. And again, the driving factors are going to be decentralized, that democratized, and that facilitation shared economy. And that is key to local government and key to businesses. You cannot play to lose because you will lose. It will overcome you, and it's going to happen.
So, Chris, let me ask you one quick question, because the last, we were doing great until you terrified everybody there for a second. So one of these forces is behavioral insights, right? And so as you start to talk about trusting strangers more than institutions, and the way that things are being decentralized, is the key for our audience members to really start looking at technologies as a way to understand behavior, so that in their business or local government that we have a good look into what people want more than we have in the past?
Yes and no. I think from the yes side of the house, one of the interesting things with technology is a very human thing that we've seen recently is everybody's digital experience. Every time they encounter something novel, it becomes their new baseline for what they assume is good, right? Which is really painful for people who aren't evolving quickly. And where you'll be able to see is you can see some of those trends in technology in terms of behavior. But again, if you look back and use the driving human factors of we want to reduce uncertainty. In this case, just as the mayor said, provide information in a digestible format. So shaping your digital experience and your technology to serve that need is really critically important to drive the behavior that you want, right? There's little things, right? Here's an example. If you are a hospital website, did you consider that some people who come to your hospital website may have a child who was just in a car accident? And if your website is confusing, how is that person going to process your information? How are they going to know what to do? So if you look at it from the government perspective, to your point, a lot of people who contact government are not necessarily in a happy place. Some of them are. Some of them are just curious. How do you shape that experience? Because trying to see behavioral trends, you can shape that with your own technology and how you interface and how you feed out information.
Good. All right, so we're talking about people and how they behave, but also understanding the shift that's occurring in this country gets us into this area of demographics. John, you want to talk about how that factors into the work you're doing and share a little with folks about where you're going working for Colliers?
I would love to. Thank you and good morning. I know someplace I have a high school math teacher and a college statistician or statistics teacher who's rolling in laughter, thinking I'm here to talk about demographics. Demographics, what demographics really means, it's statistical analysis or statistical similarities of a population. I can't sit here and I can't give you numbers. I can't interpret numbers. I can't tell you where the next generation's going for sure. I think we know. What I can share with you is the important thing, which is how does a statistical portion of our population behave? That's all I can react to in real estate. In real estate that doesn't address the behavior of people fails. And if you don't change, you will fail. You need to accommodate the statistical population in your trade area. All I can do is look at behavior of people. I've learned over time that I can't beat the facts. I could have Whole Foods, do a deal with Whole Foods and say, let me bring you here. And they say, there aren't enough people there that appreciate our product, that pay for our product. There's not enough density. I could have the most beautiful site, perfect access, and so on. And I try to shove Whole Foods in there, they won't succeed. The facts are that population, that demographic, that trade area cannot support a Whole Foods. I can't go out we've all done this in my business. We've said, look at this beautiful residential growth. There's a couple of projects underway. I'm putting a center here because look at all the population growth. It's real easy to overestimate population growth. You really need in real estate, which probably applies to most of your businesses, you need it in place. You need density. You need enough people to support my stores. You need enough people to come and consume your products that you're selling. It's real hard to bet on the come and say, I know it's coming. I can say, this is an area of growth. I'd prefer here rather than a place without growth. But I need density. I need people there today. Accessibility can overcome a lot in real estate. For instance, I can have a trade area that's not quite as strong as I want, but I've got 494. I could have a trade area that is a little soft, but all of a sudden I've got the light rail. I've got accessibility. People can get there. On the flip side, it's real easy to many times look at some areas and think, boy, this is wonderful, really great demographics, but I've got natural barriers. I think many of our businesses have natural barriers. But Burnsville has a natural barrier. It's got a big river. Bloomington shares the river, right? South Bloomington has got wonderful demographics, great incomes, great homes, high ownership of homes, wonderful schools. Yet it's not great in my business for retail because it's got the Minnesota River. It makes it a 180-degree trade area. I can't get people from the south, which is Burnsville, because they can't get to me because of the river. Northtown Mall, some of us know Northtown Mall. The Mississippi River runs right along Northtown Mall. Despite high density, that trade area struggled for many, many years. You can't beat it. You can't put in the most wonderful mall at Northtown Mall and say, I'm going to have a wonderful performing mall, because the river's there and it cuts it off. You can't beat the facts. Northtown Mall has struggled for years and years and years. And all of a sudden, a better trade area to the north took over. This is a wonderful story for us here in Bloomington. Show patience with my assets probably applies to many of your businesses. There's times to be patient and let the anger calm, right? And think about what's happening. We have a property in Bloomington at 494 in France. For 14 and a half years, we didn't have one day of 1 square foot of vacancy. 494 in France, retail, everybody knows it, right? 180,000 cars going by, France Avenue, new bridge, expanded daytime population, everything my business needs. In 14 months, we lost 85% of our tenants. 2009, 2010. Post-crash, Circuit City, CompUSA, Office Depot, they all left. And all I had left was I had 15% occupied by Michael's stores. This is a center that, it's funny, everybody thinks it's in Edina because it's on the north side of 494. It's actually in Bloomington. So this was our center, and even Staples wasn't there at the time. This is what we had. Everything was closed. And it's 2009, 2010. Everybody's ready to slit their wrists in retail and commercial real estate. And of course, I get the indoor go-karts that want to come do a deal, long-term lease. I get Big Lots wants to come do a deal at 494 in France. Smart, you know why they came? Because they knew I had tons of vacancy. Maybe I'm desperate. Maybe I'll do a deal with someone that doesn't really belong there. We were fortunate that we had a financial and a capital structure where we weren't desperate. We were patient. And we sat back and we said, Bloomington's a wonderful community. 494 in France is wonderful. And rather than panic, we waited. And we ended up, within about 24 months, we ended up with a fully occupied center. Boy, I'm having trouble here. Do I need to point this something? There we go. So here's what we had. We had several vacancies leaving. It was ugly. And all of a sudden, by 2014, we had this wonderful redeveloped center. We showed patience. We trusted our demographics. We trusted the trade area. We ended up with tenants that we couldn't accommodate when we were fully occupied. And one thing we learned is, at least in our business, sometimes you need a little bit of failure for the good things to happen. We couldn't accommodate Trader Joe's and Total Wine, 2 tenants that make our center. We didn't have space for them. All of a sudden, we had vacancy. They started to say the economy's getting better, and we ended up with this wonderful center because we trusted demographics. I can tell you this, if this center was in a different trade area in the Twin Cities that wasn't as desirable, that maybe didn't have the strength of a Bloomington, Edina, Eden Prairie trade area, I probably would have done a Big Lots deal. I would have said, you know what, that's what I can get. I would have done it. We constantly review our assets. We don't fall in love with them. And there's very important elements of our business that sometimes you got to stop running around and get off the rat race and sit back and think and try to analyze. A couple things I've learned on some transactions. Employees' desires. In Chris's business, there's a very close friend of mine who has a software company. He was in Normandale Lakes here in Bloomington. Beautiful, one of the most beautiful spaces I've ever been in. And had a tough time getting employees. And he's all about young programmers. And these young programmers, they want to work 16 hours on Monday and 0 on Friday. And they want to work from home, and they want to do this. And that's the core of his business. And he had the most beautiful office space, and I was over to say, Mark, this place is great. And he says, I got to move. He lives out in Shorewood. He's the CEO. His C-suite staff all lives in Bloomington and Eden Prairie. He said, we have to move. They moved down to the North Loop. And he moved down there because that's where his business could get the talent, because that's where the talent wants to live. And the talent wants spaces with concrete and here we're out building these beautiful spaces with marble and wood and beautiful carpet. They don't want it. I want it, so I'm 56 years old, right? And I want it, but you know what? Our clients don't. And it's so easy to keep building the granite and the marble and all this, and you find out that the smart guy, my buddy Mark, says, Johnny, I can't use this. My business can't do this. I need to move on. And so that's why when I say, the demographics, that's not really a demographic of a population, that's a demographic of an employer, but I can't beat what the facts are. I can't change it. I can't do what I want and think it's going to work. I got to do what the market wants, what my friend wants. Another perfect example is, what's the image? What's the desire? I have a tenant in Brooklyn Center. It's a completely different demographic than here. It's dense. It's got more of a minority population. The retail market's significantly more difficult there. But I've got an old building there. It's got K&G Menswear in it. It's a division of Men's Warehouse. And it's their lower end, a little bit more minority based. They do wonderfully. And I own the building. So their lease goes 10 years. I go up and I meet them and I say, guys, you want to renew? They would say, we'd love to renew. And the tile is falling apart. Literally, the counter is old Formica where, how the edges come off. They have duct tape holding the front edge of the Formica on the countertop. And I said, guys, when we renew, why don't I give you some money? You sign a 10-year lease. I can finance part of this. I'll give you some money to renovate your store. Let's clean this up. It was in tough shape. The bathrooms were bad, everything. And they looked at me and they said, no way. We can't. And I said, you got to be kidding me. They said, if we put a piece of Cambria on that countertop, our customers think we're charging them too much. We don't want it. They said, take it off the rent. They said, whatever money you would give us on a normal renewal, please take it off our rent, move our costs down, let us make our product affordable. They said, we do really well here because everybody walks in and they think this is a value. And the image is, if you make it better, stuff's expensive in here. They didn't want to become Nordstrom Rack. They didn't want to become Macy's. They wanted to be the bargain. That's the image they wanted to portray.
John, let me jump in and ask you a question here about the behavior. Your customers, many of them are looking ahead, understanding generational attitudes, understanding the relationship of buying power. One of these trends is elder expense and the fact that we have an aging population here and how much that competes with the buying power for retail. How much are you having to forecast now into the future to figure this out as opposed to in the past just being responsive to what your clients wanted to do?
I'm actually in the middle of it right now. We, the aging population, the statistics state they spend less as they retire. They might help their kids, they might help grandkids spend more, but the actual retired and the aging population spends a little less. They spend it differently. I'll give you a perfect example of some consumer behavior. We have a property in White Bear Lake that's next to 35E, Centerville Road, very busy road, hard to cross, next to McDonald's, a Walgreens. It doesn't feel sexy for senior housing. And I went to a senior housing project that's on this beautiful park. In a block, you're at this beautiful lake. There's nobody around it, and there's birds and deer and just stunningly beautiful, right? And my first thought was, some people had approached us to say, I'd like to put senior housing on your site in White Bear. And I said, how do you compete with that? And they said, that's 50% occupied. They don't want to live in the park. They want to live in the action. And I was shocked. And so here's these people that are putting $30 million into senior housing that understand their client, that understand this aging population. You know what? They want to be able to walk to McDonald's and have $1 cup of coffee. They want to walk across this very busy street and go to Cub Foods. They want to be in the middle of action. They love Walgreens prescriptions. It's literally a block. We're now, surprisingly, it's kind of wonderful for them, we're putting a Lund's store, Lund's and Byerly's, on our site. I've never seen a population in this retirement community so excited. They can literally walk out their front door, short sidewalk, they can be in a Lund's and Byerly's. They can't wait. There's freeway, there's billboards, there's these, and I thought, no way would you put senior housing here. But that's what the seniors want. I didn't know that. I had to learn it. I had to understand it. The other thing we should mention is I was going to go back here to one of these slides previous. Look at the parking that's on this. This is a traditional shopping center, right? Look at how much parking we have. Generally, these sites, 25% building area, 75% landscape and parking. It's probably 2/3 of the site is parking. This driverless car thing is real. Tesla right now, if you go to a Tesla dealer, their showroom here, they will tell you the driverless function other than on the freeway is turned off. You know what that means? It's there, right? And it's a software update that comes to these cars and says, when the software is good and the government says yes, it's ready to go. Can you imagine what happens in a shopping center if there's driverless cars? That they park 2 inches apart? My center could send out a notice that all these driverless cars would get, and we could say, here's where you park when you're owner of your vehicle's in the store. You know where they go? They go to the back of the center that no one ever parks in these stalls because it's too hard to walk around. They go to the most inconvenient stalls in your center, and they park 2 inches apart, and they can triple park. And when I hit a button on my phone and my car comes, the 2 cars in front of it move, mine pulls out, they go back in. I think you might need 1/3 as much parking when this economy goes to driverless cars. It's going to happen. Chris, I know what you think. It's going to happen. And we need to design and build for that. And what's going to happen is I'm going to have a lot less parking, and I'm going to have the good sites, I'm going to have a little more building area. I'm going to have more density, more tax revenue. Right, Mayor?
Yeah.
Or you may even end up with more green space, right?
More green space. But
Which
I
you
literally think-
don't want to maximize green space from a business perspective, but I know that Tim Sandry would love to maximize green space. So I'm gonna pause you here, John, and I'm gonna turn it over to Tim, who's gonna talk about some of the resource trends, but especially through the lens of sustainability. Since we have a new commission, it's a nice opportunity to talk about what we're doing there and then how it fits with our trends.
All right, thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be here and an opportunity to speak to something that I'm really passionate about, which is sustainability. And the reason why I'm so passionate about it is my kids and their grandkids, should I ever have grandkids, or my grandkids. So every time I talk to my kids or think about them being in a relationship and having kids, I think about what kind of a world are they going to inherit from us. And it's looking pretty grim right now. This is not going to be a doomsday speech, but I think, from a trend perspective, it's looking pretty grim. For the Sustainability Commission, sustainability means lots of different things to different people. I was out talking to some folks, before, and I said I'm, chair of the Sustainability Commission. He says, well, what do you mean by sustainability? So for us, we have 4 areas that we focus on. One is, energy, climate change. Solid waste is the second one. The third one is surface and groundwater. And the fourth one is something that we call ecological land stewardship, which is especially important for Bloomington because of the whole river valley that we have here and the condition of that wilderness, you may call it, and the historical significance of that. But it also extends to the land that is outside the window here, or around your house, or around your business. So if you take a look at those 4 areas, across the board, globally, things are in pretty rough shape. I think about the people in Houston and Florida, and Florida is especially near and dear to my heart because we have a vacation home there on a small barrier island off the coast of Fort Myers. And last weekend was a sleepless weekend, wondering whether our home was going to be there. Fortunately for us, we dodged, as one person said, we dodged a cannon because Marco Island was trashed, and which is south of us, and Fort Myers area got damaged, and north of us got trashed. We suffered very little damage or structural damage, so we considered ourselves to be very lucky. So climate change predicts that we're going to have more frequent 1,000-year storms, 500-year storms, 100-year storms, and there's a lot of consequences from global from the warming temperature, but there are also opportunities here. And so I want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about, and I kind of took a tact here, knowing the audience, to take a look at, so what's in Bloomington? What's going to happen? What are the trends from a sustainability standpoint that are going to put pressure on the residents and especially the businesses in Bloomington? And the pressures are going to be that we're going to be pressured to use less fossil fuels, more renewables, more energy conservation. We're going to be pressured to reduce the amount of trash that's taken to a landfill or to a garbage burner. We're going to be pressured to use less water and reduce the runoff of chemicals, the phosphates, the nitrates, the salt into the watersheds. And we're going to be pressured to move to more natural types of landscaping. So there's going to be a special focus on businesses for this, because from a sustainability standpoint, businesses are a target-rich target-rich environment. For example, the business sector within Bloomington uses much more energy and thereby emits much more carbon than the residential sector does. Recycling participation for residential is pretty high, 80, 90%. For commercial, about 20. Businesses are major users of water to water these vast landscapes that surround businesses in the summertime, which contributes to a declining aquifer that we sit on top of. And businesses account for a disproportionate share of fertilizer and salt that ends up in our watershed. So, the federal government, the state government, city governments, county governments are be putting a lot more pressure on all of us to be sustainable. And in many cases, it's going to be a lot easier to change the behavior of 4,000 businesses than it is to change the behavior of 85,000 residents. So the focus, there's going to be a big focus on business. And at first blush, we talk about trends. This sounds like it's going to be government mandates that are going to make it, more difficult to stay in business, make a profit, whatever. But potentially, there's another way of looking at this. More and more businesses are seeing that, or realizing that becoming more sustainable can also help them become more profitable. Because in many cases, and I'm going to give some examples here, as you become more sustainable, you reduce the cost of doing business, or you gain a marketing advantage. In fact, a recent business survey of companies that have sustainability programs reported that over 70% of the respondents who have such a program reported that they're saving money because of their sustainability program. So they're not doing it, they're not doing it just because it's the right thing to do. They're doing it because there's a good business reason to be doing it. Of course, you need to be a fairly large business to have a sustainability program, but you don't need a sustainability program to see the savings from being more sustainable. So for example, solid waste. So the pressure here, right, is that the state and county government agencies have a huge desire to reduce the amount of solid waste that's going into landfills and the burner here in the metro area, because that leads to groundwater contamination. It leads to air pollution, release of methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. So as a result, there's a huge push to increase the amount of recycling, both regular kind of recycling as well as organic recycling. So you may not be aware of this, but there actually is a Minnesota state statute that requires all businesses to have a recycling program. And Hennepin County is pushing really hard to increase recycling rates, so it's likely that at some point in the not too distant future, Hennepin County is going to be pushing cities to enforce the state statute. However, instituting a recycling program can actually save businesses some money. If you take a look at a business's trash bill, there is between the state tax and the county tax, that is 31.5% of, that rate is 31.5%. For recycling, 0. So in addition, the tipping fees for recycling are much less. So depending upon your circumstances, a business could see a reduction in the trash bill by instituting a recycling program. And this is especially true for restaurants because restaurants generate a lot of recyclable material. So, for example, both Quality Bike Products and Ike's Restaurant here in Bloomington went down this path and are seeing significant savings as a result. On the energy and carbon front, the state has a goal of reducing carbon emissions by 30% by the year 2025, 80% by the year 2050, using 2006 as a baseline. There's no way that's going to happen without getting businesses on board. Businesses are likely to start seeing more and more pressure from the state government, from county government, from the cities to reduce their reliance on fossil fuel. For example, the city of Bloomington has an ordinance pending that will institute new standards for parking lot lights that can only be realistically met using LED lighting. So here are some examples of what businesses in Bloomington are doing or have done to green their bottom line by going green. Ike's built a new restaurant here in Bloomington with a seating capacity, excuse me, that is twice as large as their restaurant in Minnetonka. However, they installed all LED lights and highly efficient, energy efficient appliances. And as a result, their electrical bill for the new restaurant, which is twice the capacity of their restaurant in Minnetonka, is half. Their electrical bill is half as what it is for their restaurant in Minnetonka. And they are now in the process of looking to retrofit their Minnetonka restaurant with LED lights and energy efficient appliances. Quality Bike Products here in Bloomington installed solar panels on their roof, expecting to see a 10 to 12 year payback. They also retrofitted their parking lot lights with LED, expecting a 7-year payback on lights that will last 30 years or more. So, and because of the reduced cost of LED lights, today the typical payback period is about 5 years. So, and for businesses unable to do solar panels, sign up for a solar garden, which has no upfront cost, can save them around 5% on their electrical bill. So, and finally, groundwater, for those of you that own land and have a lot of grass to maintain, you know, from a groundwater perspective, Bloomington has plenty of groundwater to draw from for two reasons. One is because it buys half of its water or over half of its water from the city of Minneapolis, and also because the aquifer that sits below Bloomington is in pretty good shape because, as I've talked to the water folks here, it's kind of a valley, and all the water from the aquifer kind of collects in the valley. So, you know, we're in pretty good shape here in Bloomington. However, the other cities drawing from that same aquifer are not so lucky. And it is unlikely that in the long term, at the current rate of which water is being drawn from the aquifer, is sustainable. And it's going to run dry if something is not done. And it's likely that the Met Council is going to step in at some point and take action, which would probably require higher water bills and watering restrictions. You know, it never ceases to amaze me, excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold here, that when I drive around in the summer in the rain and there are sprinkling systems that are chugging away, you know, a moisture sensor would probably, you know, the payback is probably a summer. Or even better, convert all that grass to prairie planting. It doesn't cost that much, and you only have to mow it once or twice a year, and there's no irrigation required. So I don't want to be, excuse me, I don't want to be too Pollyanna about this, you know, about these potential opportunities. I know from personal experience that as a business owner, one of the biggest costs is opportunity costs. You know, every day, the first order of business is making sure that the business is running well today. And there are innumerable opportunities for how to better things in the business to choose from. So, and there's also the challenge of cash flow. Many of these opportunities I talked about, LED lights and solar panels and, you know, those sorts of things, those require a upfront capital investment. So that impacts, you know, cash flow. So what I believe here is what we need is the easy button. You know, the little commercial, the easy button. That's kind of what we need here around sustainability to help businesses take advantage of some of these opportunities and, by extension, help us become more sustainable. So as a commission, you know, we're looking at how we can find the resources and money to assist business owners with making it easy to implement sustainability projects, you know, like, you know, energy conservation, implementing recycling programs, you know, converting LED lights, parking lot lights, you know, prairie gardens, you know, so on and so forth. And those resources might come from Hennepin County. Excel Energy is here. They have programs for small businesses. And Centerpoint Energy is here. I believe they have the same. It might be partnering with organizations such as the Center for Energy and Environment that can do free energy audits for small businesses. It could be resources from the city or even from volunteers within Bloomington who have expertise that they can lend to a small business owner trying to figure out, for example, how do I figure out whether doing a recycling program is going to make sense for my business?
Tim, let me stop you there because I want to be sensitive to time. We're going to go about 5 minutes over for this segment. I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. Diane, do we have the handheld microphone handy somewhere? If not, I think we can probably hear you in here. So I'd invite questions based on what you've heard, and I've got one ready to go for our panelists too if nobody's jumping up right away. John, go ahead.
There's this, and I would address this to all of you, to all of you. Do I really need this? All right. There's this permanent, never-ending tension between reacting to the needs of the present versus being out front and looking ahead and planning for where you want to be or where you need to be down the road a piece. How do you balance, how do you prioritize? Where's your emphasis? How do you determine the emphasis between the now and the future? And I think it applies to what you all are involved in.
30 seconds each. Mary, you want to start?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for the question. It's a great question because here's what we need to do because there are always the urgent that impacts us. So, for instance, a storm, that's going to be urgent and important. My hope is that all cities, and we do in Burnsville, have a fund to address those issues, but at the same time, you have to continue with the daily business of moving forward. And if you have a long view, you're still going to be managing that strategic direction and making sure that you have the patience to get at it. And I'm glad that John talked about that because a lot of the work that we do as municipal government is having that long view to look to the future. But we're not we know that there are going to be urgent issues that impact on a daily basis, whether it's a domestic terror or a natural event that impacts us. We have to address that. Hopefully, all of us have funds to make sure that we can get that done and then see if the federal government can help us, because it lags. Sometimes it's 2 years before they can pay us.
Chris?
But we need to make sure we do that.
So to answer that question, I think most relevantly from my position, it's talent, right? How people and so what we're doing is today is we're looking for as many talented people as possible. We're expanding the horizons of work from home. We're looking at places like Phoenix because it's the flyover from Silicon Valley. It's the next bump out. We're looking at how to do different things. And from the future proofing, that's where our diversity, inclusion, and our education programs come in. The Nerdery spun off a company called Prime Academy, which is a 12-week code camp, because the idea is that I don't have enough technical expertise, and the marketplace, there's a war for talent. Minnesota unemployment is what, like 3.5%. In the technology space, in the fields I'm looking for, it's under 0.5%. So the average turnover in companies like mine is between 30 and 50% a year. So you can just imagine what that does to my operational planning. So there's fleshing out that educational program, and to be perfectly honest, not waiting for the four-year institutions to figure out that they're 25 years behind, and getting people into functional spaces where they're viable on day one. 12 weeks at Prime makes you a functionally capable engineer that can provide value to an employer. Bam. Done. I don't have to wait 4 years. I didn't have to do any electives. You're productive and valuable to the client. And doing that, and also expanding into non-traditional places. Our grants for Prime Academy target areas that are not necessarily technology heavy, right? Going into North Minneapolis and finding demographics of people who don't usually participate, untapped markets, and getting them participating in my talent market. So that's how we look at the long-term future. And if you look around, technology companies are doing that en masse. They're not waiting for traditional institutions to catch up. They're starting to do on-the-job program training, pair programming, and different things like that. So that's how we're in a day-to-day trench war for talent today, but what we're doing is, with other partnerships and other companies, is trying to grow that talent. So trying to grow that future talent and working with organizations for STEM in education.
So I think that we all need to think about this from a business perspective. The short term is what's happening today. We need to make sure that we're focused on today. But at the same time, all businesses, whether it's formal or reactionary, are thinking about the future. They're looking at the trends, and for city government, that means we got the comp plan, going on right now, where we have to look 10 years out. And we need to think very carefully about what's in that comp plan to make sure that we're focused on the right issues. We've got the resources set up to address those issues that are most critical. And even from a sustainability standpoint, what can we do right now? What are the things that are harder that's going to take more time? And we need to put together plans and actions to figure out how to get there over time.
John?
I love what the mayor opened with, that she's at the end of the food chain. That's us. Here's our problem. We build a building that can last for 70 years, whether it's office, industrial, retail. You change, and I'm one of you. My behavior changes as a consumer. My tenant reacts to that. And now that my tenant says, does the building that Mr. Johannson built for me work anymore or not? If it doesn't work, I'm in trouble. And think about just retail alone. We started as shopping on Main Street, little tiny 20-foot wide spaces in downtowns. We went to Target and Walmart to 150 to 200,000 foot stores. 200,000 feet is a super Walmart today. Now there's a trend back away from the great big boxes a little bit. The national chain restaurants, the casual dining restaurants, the Chili's and Applebee's, they're in trouble. Everybody's going to the Tavern, which is owned by some local guys. We're going to casual dining, but locally owned. We don't like the big chains that are stock firms anymore. My buildings need to accommodate people, and there's some things I can do that I've learned and I'm constantly looking, what do I need to do? We used to have buildings, and we'd grade the site, and we'd put the building right at the grade we wanted. Well, I'd have a 4,000 foot space, and next door I'd have another 4,000. I'd have a 1 foot grade change inside the building. That's dumb. because I might need an 8,000 foot space and I can't have a 4,000 foot and a foot below. I want to be able to rip that wall out in the middle. I don't make it structural anymore. The structure's on the outside. I can go 2, 4, 8. I try to keep a flat floor plate as long as I can. And if I need to change grade, I make a new building and I have a steep change in the middle. I don't change grade in the middle of my building. I can tell you every property we're doing right now, I was such a skeptic that I've become such a believer now in all this electric vehicle, the EV charging and so on. The problem with EV charging is you need 240 volt up to 50 amp power. It's a lot of power. But you know what? My tenants have employees and customers that want to charge their cars while they're shopping. So every building we're doing, whether it's office, industrial, I'm putting tons of power into my building, and I'm running lines into the parking lot before I pave, so that if I need more charging stations, which by the way, they're coming, you know, I bet in 10 years, a quarter of our stalls have charging stations, 25%. My power in my new centers is underground, sitting in the landscape island, ready to be hooked up, and it's 240 volt, 50 amp, ready to go. Bikes. We put almost everything we do now, we put bike lockers, we put bike racks, we put showers. People can come in, they want to ride their bike. You know what? They want to shower sometimes. We're doing it. We're trying to predict the future. The problem is you and I, we're going to keep changing. And my building's sitting there, and I hope my building can accommodate what we become. It's hard.
Good place to end. Let's thank our panelists.